I always thought success came easily to people who were lucky or born with certain advantages. Growing up in a modest neighborhood in the Midwest, I had a typical upbringing. My parents were hard workers, but neither had college degrees, and we never had much extra cash. The idea of entrepreneurship never really occurred to me. Instead, I dreamed of a stable 9-to-5 job, a house with a white picket fence, and a secure future. But things didn't go according to plan, and my entire life trajectory shifted when I stumbled into the world of business completely by accident. It all started after I graduated college. I studied communications, a field I enjoyed, but with limited job prospects. My first real job out of school was at a marketing agency in downtown Chicago, a position I'd worked hard to get. The company seemed promising at first. I was surrounded by talented people, and the work was challenging, but the pay was barely enough to cover rent, and the hours were brutal. My boss, a self-proclaimed visionary, often had wild ideas that were more about ego than practical business strategies. More than once, I stayed late to fix errors in his half-baked campaigns, and on weekends, I found myself having to do damage control for clients. But one day, something changed. I had just finished another late night in the office, and I was feeling burnt out. I was walking down Michigan Avenue when I noticed a small storefront with a closed for renovations sign. There was something about that sign that caught my attention, so I decided to pop in and ask the owner what was going on. As it turned out, the shop had been struggling for months, and the owner was looking to sell. He had no real understanding of digital marketing, and that was where I saw an opportunity. I didn't have much money saved up at the time, but the idea of owning my own business felt exhilarating. The small store, a brick-and-mortar retail shop, seemed like the perfect chance to do something on my own, to escape the corporate grind. I remember that night, sitting at home, staring at the business listing, weighing the pros and cons. I had no idea what I was doing, but something inside me told me that if I didn't take the risk now, I might never get another shot. So, I borrowed some money from family, never an easy decision, by the way, took a deep breath, and decided to buy the store. The next few months were a whirlwind of meetings with the previous owner, learning about the inventory, dealing with contractors to remodel the space, and, of course, diving headfirst into marketing. My communications degree had prepared me for a lot of things, but entrepreneurship wasn't one of them. I had no idea how to run a business, how to manage employees, or even how to price products. But what I did have was a drive to succeed, a willingness to learn, and a knack for problem solving. The first big hurdle came when I realized that the shop's customer base was disappearing. Foot traffic had slowed dramatically in recent years, and it wasn't enough to simply open the doors and hope for the best. I knew that I had to adapt quickly. So, I did what any young, inexperienced entrepreneur would do. I started researching. I spent every free moment reading articles, watching YouTube videos, and attending webinars about marketing, sales strategies, and customer retention. I learned everything I could about online retail, social media marketing, and how to create a customer experience that would turn a one-time buyer into a loyal fan. I made some rookie mistakes, of course. The first time I tried to run an Instagram ad, I accidentally spent $200 on a campaign that barely reached 20 people. But each mistake was a lesson. I tweaked my approach, and slowly but surely, things started to change. I revamped the website, making it more user-friendly and incorporating e-commerce into the mix. I built an Instagram presence, shared customer stories, and engaged with local influencers. In just a few months, the shop was seeing more foot traffic, and online sales were picking up. But success didn't happen overnight. There were countless sleepless nights where I was buried in spreadsheets, trying to optimize inventory or figure out the logistics of shipping orders nationwide. The work was grueling, but the satisfaction of seeing the business grow kept me going. I hired a few employees to help with the workload, and over time, I started to build a small but loyal team. My original vision was to keep the business small, but as it grew, so did my ambitions. A pivotal moment came when a local magazine did a feature on the store. The piece went viral in the community, and suddenly, people from all over the city were making the trek to visit. Sales surged, and the exposure gave me the confidence to expand. But there was one problem: cash flow. Running a business was like riding a roller coaster, and sometimes it felt like I was barely hanging on. There were months when I was barely breaking even, and I worried about whether I'd be able to pay the rent. That's when I realized something. I needed to create multiple streams of income. I had a successful retail store, but it wasn't enough. So, I invested in a subscription box service for customers who couldn't visit in person. The boxes featured curated items from our store, and the idea quickly took off. It was a small step, but it allowed me to stabilize the business while continuing to build on the retail side. The next step was expanding our online presence even further. I knew that if I wanted to scale, I had to invest in digital marketing at a bigger level. With the help of a talented digital marketing consultant, we refined our SEO strategy, ran paid ads on multiple platforms, and began offering exclusive online-only deals. Slowly but surely, the brand gained recognition beyond Chicago. But the real turning point came when we launched a new line of products that were completely different from anything we had sold before. This new collection targeted a different demographic, and I was hesitant at first. I wasn't sure if it would fit with our existing brand, but I took the leap. To my surprise, it became our best-selling product line. By the end of my first year in business, I had learned more than I ever thought possible. The hustle, the late nights, the failures, the successes, it all felt worth it. I had built something from the ground up, and while the journey wasn't easy, it was one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. Today, the business is thriving. We've expanded into new locations, and I now have a team of dedicated employees who believe in the vision as much as I do. We continue to innovate, learn, and grow every day. Looking back, I often marvel at how far I've come from that young, unsure graduate sitting at home with a dream of a stable job. I've learned that success isn't about luck. It's about taking risks, learning from your mistakes, and never giving up. I didn't expect to end up here, but I'm glad I did. The entrepreneurial journey isn't for the faint of heart, but it's the most fulfilling path I've ever walked. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. I'll start by saying that I'm an accidental entrepreneur. It wasn't like I had a passion for business or some grand vision. It all started when I was working a regular 9-to-5 job at a marketing agency. Everything was moving along fine until one day I woke up with the realization that I absolutely hated what I was doing. I wasn't miserable, but I wasn't passionate about the work either. I'd been at the agency for nearly 2 years, and every day felt like the same thing. I would wake up, go to work, sit at my desk, and mindlessly click through tasks that didn't excite me. I was burnt out before I even knew what burnout truly meant. The thought of continuing this path for the next 30 years was honestly terrifying. The breaking point came when I was given a project to work on that I had no interest in. It wasn't just that the work didn't excite me, it was that I had no control over the direction of the project. I was working on a social media campaign for a client I didn't even care about, and the creative direction was decided by someone else who had no real understanding of the audience or product. I was the kind of person who could always spot a business opportunity, but at the time, I had no idea how to make the leap. It wasn't just about starting a business. It was about escaping a life I didn't want. One night, as I sat scrolling through Instagram, another thing I felt like I had to do for work, I came across an ad for a course on e-commerce and how to build a store from scratch. I thought it was a scam at first, but something about it sparked my curiosity. I signed up, spent hours watching the videos, and immediately felt something shift inside me. It felt like this was something I could actually do. But, of course, I was skeptical. I had zero experience in retail. I didn't know the first thing about creating an online store, and most importantly, I didn't have much capital to throw into something like this. But I kept going. I couldn't ignore the excitement building up inside of me every time I learned a new concept. The first challenge I faced was figuring out what product I wanted to sell. I wanted something unique, something I could really get behind. I spent weeks researching products, browsing suppliers, and narrowing down options. It wasn't as easy as I thought it would be. There's so much noise in the e-commerce space, and everyone seems to be selling the same thing. After much trial and error, I settled on custom-designed apparel, shirts, hoodies, and hats. Why? Because it was something I genuinely loved, and I could get creative with it. I started small, designing a few simple shirts with quirky sayings that I thought people would resonate with. The problem was, I didn't know anything about branding, marketing, or even how to set up a website. But I kept pushing. I used Shopify to create a basic online store and put up a couple of designs. I spent hours tweaking the site, making sure it was perfect, but there was one issue I couldn't avoid. I needed traffic. I quickly learned that without a solid marketing strategy, even the most amazing products wouldn't sell. I had to figure out how to drive traffic to my site, and that's when I dived deep into social media marketing. I learned about Facebook and Instagram ads, content creation, influencer partnerships, and email marketing. It was overwhelming, but each new skill I picked up was like unlocking a new level in a video game. One thing that really helped was using my agency background. While the job itself was draining, the marketing knowledge I gained there was invaluable. I knew how to create a campaign, understand target demographics, and write copy that actually resonated. I just had to apply that knowledge to something I cared about. I started small with Facebook and Instagram ads. My budget was tight, so I had to be strategic. I spent a lot of late nights testing different ad creatives, refining my target audience, and optimizing my website to improve conversion rates. It felt like an endless cycle of trial and error, but with each failure, I learned something new. At first, sales were slow. I remember feeling defeated when I made my first sale after weeks of marketing efforts. It was such a small victory, but it was also a huge turning point for me. It proved that the model could work if I kept refining it. I kept testing new strategies, adding more designs to my store, and slowly but surely, my sales began to climb. One of the key turning points for me was when I created a design that went viral. It was a simple shirt with a message that perfectly captured the mood of the moment, and it started getting shared all over social media. Sales skyrocketed. I couldn't believe it. It was the first time I saw my business grow in a significant way. The product took off, and I was able to reinvest the money into scaling my operations. At the same time, I was still working at my agency. I was working 60-hour weeks, juggling the demands of my 9 to 5 with the growing e-commerce store. It was exhausting, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was my way out. Eventually, the time came when I realized I could no longer give my full energy to both. The e-commerce business had become my passion, and I was ready to dive into it full-time. Leaving my steady job was terrifying. I had a safety net, and quitting meant giving up a reliable paycheck. But after months of working on both, I knew it was time. I made the leap, went full-time with my business, and threw myself into scaling it. The early days were a roller coaster. There were so many challenges. Managing customer service, shipping logistics, product design, and marketing all on my own felt like an impossible task. But little by little, I learned how to streamline processes, hire help, and build a team that could support the growth of the business. A big lesson I learned in those early months was the importance of reinvesting profits back into the business. It's easy to want to take a paycheck when things start going well, but I realized that the real growth came from consistently putting the money back into marketing, hiring, and improving customer experience. Fast forward a year, and I had expanded my product line, created a brand that resonated with customers, and built a small team. I went from working alone at a desk in my apartment to managing a small but efficient business. It wasn't always glamorous, but it was incredibly fulfilling. Looking back, I'm proud of what I built, but it wasn't easy. It took a lot of sleepless nights, stress, and moments of doubt. The important thing is that I kept going. The business became my escape from a life I wasn't happy with, and that's the core of my entrepreneurial journey. If you're someone who's thinking about taking the leap, know that it's not all rainbows and unicorns. It's hard work, it's filled with obstacles, and it's not going to happen overnight. But if you're willing to put in the effort, push through the tough times, and keep learning, the rewards can be life-changing. Sometimes, it's not about having a clear vision from the start. It's about taking that first step and trusting that you'll figure it out along the way. That's how I became an entrepreneur, and I wouldn't trade the journey for anything. I never thought I'd be where I am today, running my own business. Let me take you back to where it all started. It was 2015 when I first decided to quit my job and try my hand at entrepreneurship. I had been working as a marketing manager at a small tech company, and while it wasn't a terrible job, it was clear to me that I wasn't meant to be stuck in a 9-to-5 grind. I was 28, hungry for more, and deeply frustrated with the limitations of corporate life. Every day felt like a monotonous cycle of meetings, emails, and deadlines. Sure, I got a decent salary and some perks, but I wasn't living my dream. I had a couple of side hustles going at the time, writing for a few online publications, managing some social media accounts for local businesses, but nothing that felt like it was truly mine. I was at a crossroads. I could keep going down the corporate path, slowly climbing the ladder, or I could take a leap and pursue something bigger. Deep down, I knew what I had to do. I wanted to build something I could be proud of, something that reflected my passions and talents. but taking that leap felt like a risk. I had student loans, a mortgage, and all the responsibilities that come with being an adult. I wasn't living paycheck to paycheck, but I was far from financially free. I remember the day I quit my job. It wasn't dramatic. It was more like an uneasy, deliberate step. I had a conversation with my boss, and I handed in my resignation. She was supportive, though I could tell she thought I was making a huge mistake. At that moment, I wasn't sure if I was making the right choice either. But once that email was sent, there was no going back. The next few months were a whirlwind of uncertainty. I didn't have a clear business plan, but I had an idea. I had been observing the growing trend of online education and self-improvement. It felt like every second person I knew was either taking an online course or sharing some motivational podcast episode. And it clicked. Why not create an online platform that curates and offers personal development content, but with a unique spin? At first, I didn't know exactly what niche to focus on. There were hundreds of thousands of content creators, coaches, and experts in this space. But as I researched more, I found a gap. Most platforms offered generic courses or materials that were either too expensive or overly theoretical. There was a demand for affordable, practical, and actionable advice, something people could take and implement immediately in their lives. I decided to focus on a niche I felt deeply passionate about: time management and productivity. I had spent years reading books, listening to podcasts, and experimenting with productivity systems. I had tested everything from Pomodoro techniques to time blocking to habit tracking. And while there was a lot of useful content out there, it often lacked real-world applicability. I wanted to create something that was rooted in practical steps and wasn't just about theory. I started small, really small. I registered a domain, created a basic website, and launched a blog. It was pretty basic at first, just a few posts about productivity hacks, time management techniques, and personal development. I didn't have any customers yet, but I started sharing my posts on social media and in relevant online communities. Slowly, I began gaining traction. People started engaging with my content. They asked questions, left comments, and shared their own tips. At first, it wasn't much, maybe a few hundred visitors a month, but it felt like a win. I was slowly building a community. The next step was to create a product. I didn't have any big investors or savings to fall back on, so I started small. I created a mini course on time management, something simple yet valuable. I priced it affordably, just $19. The goal wasn't to make a lot of money right away. It was to start building a customer base and proving that there was demand for what I was offering. To my surprise, the course sold. Not a lot, but enough to convince me that there was something here. I reinvested the small profits into improving my website, creating more content, and refining my marketing. I spent hours every day on social media, connecting with potential customers, answering questions, and sharing insights. I also reached out to influencers in the productivity space, asking if they would be willing to promote my course in exchange for a free copy. Slowly, I started gaining more customers, and the community around my brand continued to grow. Fast forward to 2017, and I had finally managed to scale my business. I was no longer just selling courses. I had built a subscription-based membership site where members could access exclusive content, coaching calls, and productivity resources. I had a small team of remote contractors helping me with content creation, customer service, and marketing. The business was finally starting to generate some real revenue, and I felt like I was on the verge of something bigger. But just as things were looking up, disaster struck. The platform I had been using to host my courses and membership site suddenly experienced a massive data breach. My customers' personal information, including credit card details, was compromised. The company didn't handle the situation well. They were slow to communicate, and when they did, they downplayed the severity of the issue. Customers were angry, and rightfully so. Some even demanded refunds. It was a tough time. I spent weeks dealing with the fallout, apologizing to customers, offering refunds, and working with a security expert to fix the vulnerabilities. I learned the hard way how important it is to protect customer data and how a crisis like that can damage trust. But after the storm passed, I rebuilt. I migrated my site to a more secure platform, updated my security protocols, and communicated more openly with my audience. The breach was a tough lesson, but it also forced me to refine the business in ways I hadn't anticipated. I became more transparent with my customers, started offering better support, and made sure that my systems were airtight. In the end, the business bounced back stronger than ever. Today, my platform has thousands of members, and my courses have helped people all around the world improve their productivity and manage their time more effectively. I've launched new programs, hired a full-time team, and even expanded into new areas like career coaching and personal branding. The business is profitable, and I've been able to create a lifestyle I only dreamed of just a few years ago. If there's one thing I've learned through all this, it's that entrepreneurship is a marathon, not a sprint. There will be ups and downs, moments of doubt, and times when you feel like quitting. But if you can push through, learn from your mistakes, and stay focused on your vision, success is possible. It wasn't easy, and it certainly wasn't quick, but the journey has been worth every sleepless night. So, to anyone reading this who's thinking about starting their own business, go for it. Take the leap. Be prepared to work hard, to fail, and to learn. And always, always keep moving forward. The road to success is never a straight line, but it's worth the ride. I never really thought of myself as an entrepreneur. I was the kid who would always follow the rules, take the safe path, and do what was expected of me. I went to college, got a degree in business, and landed a job at a corporate marketing firm straight out of graduation. For years, I lived in this bubble of comfort. I had a steady paycheck, predictable hours, and an easy life. The hustle and grind of starting a business felt like something for other people, those who took risks or who had some innate ability to thrive in chaos. But life, as it often does, had other plans for me. It all started with a phone call one Tuesday morning. I had just turned 30, and I had worked at the firm for 6 years. I was comfortable, sure, but I was also starting to feel that nagging sense of dissatisfaction. I wanted more, but I didn't know what that more looked like yet. Anyway, the call came from my boss, the CEO of the company. We had a conversation about the future of the firm, and then, out of nowhere, she dropped a bombshell. She was stepping down, and they were offering me her position. My heart raced. I had been in the company for 6 years, and I was a known quantity. The opportunity was huge, and I felt honored. But at the same time, I wasn't sure if it was the right fit. Was I really prepared to run the company? Was I ready to step into such a big role, or was I just taking it because it felt like the natural next step? That night, I couldn't sleep. I turned over the offer in my mind 100 different ways, weighing the pros and cons. It was a great offer. The pay was incredible, and the prestige of being the CEO of a successful firm was undeniable. But then something strange happened. I started asking myself questions that I hadn't ever considered. Questions like, is this my dream job? And what if I could do something different, something entirely my own? In the back of my mind, I always had this idea of starting a business, but I had never taken it seriously. It seemed like a distant dream. But that night, lying awake, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe it was now or never. I wasn't getting any younger, and if I was ever going to make a move, this was my chance. I called the CEO the next morning and turned down the offer. I didn't have a solid plan, no safety net, and no guarantees, but I felt that pull towards something greater. She was shocked, but she respected my decision. I left the corporate world that day, packed my things, and set off into the unknown. For the first few months, I was lost. I didn't know where to start. There was so much I didn't know. I had the skills from my marketing career, but running a business was a whole different ballgame. I spent countless hours reading books, attending seminars, and trying to piece together a plan. I had an idea, a digital marketing consultancy focused on helping small businesses grow their online presence. It seemed simple enough, but every time I tried to set up my business, I felt overwhelmed. One thing I learned quickly is that entrepreneurship is nothing like the textbooks say. In theory, I had all the right strategies in place, but the real world was filled with uncertainty. There were days when I doubted everything. There were weeks when I made no money. I'd stare at my bank account and wonder how I was going to make it through the next month. There were days I almost called it quits, but I never did. The breakthrough came when I met another entrepreneur at a networking event. He was running a similar digital marketing firm, but with a twist. Instead of just offering generic services, he had developed a software that helped businesses automate their social media management. I was fascinated by the idea and asked him how he came up with it. He explained that he had identified a gap in the market and created a solution to fill it. It was simple, but it was incredibly effective. That conversation changed my entire perspective. I realized that the key to success wasn't just in offering services, but in creating value in a way that others weren't. That night, I stayed up late sketching ideas for my own product. I had no technical background, but I knew I had to find a way to offer something unique to my clients. I reached out to a few freelance developers I knew, and together, we started building a small tool that would help businesses automate their content creation. The product wasn't fancy at first, it was rough around the edges, but it worked. Over time, we improved it, added new features, and started selling it alongside my consulting services. Slowly, it began to catch on. The more businesses used the tool, the more they spread the word, and the more clients came to us. It was still a struggle. Every day felt like an uphill battle, but things were starting to change. I could finally see the light at the end of the tunnel. My business was starting to grow, and it felt like I was finally on the path I had always dreamed of. Years went by, and the company continued to expand. We now have a team of 50 employees, a full-fledged product suite, and clients all over the world. My days are still filled with challenges, but now I embrace them. The sleepless nights, the uncertainty, and the fear are all part of the journey. I've learned that the road to entrepreneurship is never smooth, but it's worth every struggle. Looking back, I realized that everything I did up to that point had been preparing me for this moment. My corporate job taught me the fundamentals of business, but it was taking that leap into the unknown that taught me the real lessons. If I had stayed in my comfort zone, I would never have found the fulfillment I have now. Now, when people ask me about the secret to success, I tell them this: there is no secret. There's no magic formula or shortcut. It's about persistence, learning from failures, and having the courage to take that first step into the unknown. It's about being willing to embrace discomfort, knowing that growth never happens without it. And most importantly, it's about believing in yourself, even when everything around you feels uncertain. If you're reading this and thinking about starting your own business, my advice is simple: take the leap. It won't be easy, but it will be worth it. You don't have to have it all figured out from the start. Just take that first step, and the rest will follow. Don't let fear hold you back, because sometimes the greatest risk is never taking one at all. And remember, you're never alone on this journey. There's a whole community of entrepreneurs out there, ready to support you. All you have to do is reach out. You don't have to have all the answers, but you do have to start somewhere. I did, and it changed my life forever. I always thought entrepreneurship was something that happened to other people. You know the stories, the ones where someone has a breakthrough idea, hustles for a few months, and then, boom, their startup becomes the next big thing. I used to admire those stories, but I never thought I'd be living one. It all started in 2017. I was working as a middle manager at a corporate office, doing the typical 9-to-5 grind. My job was fine, but it didn't light me up. I spent most of my days buried in spreadsheets and attending meetings that seemed to go nowhere. But the worst part was the feeling of stagnation. I had big dreams, but they felt increasingly out of reach. One day, during my lunch break, I found myself scrolling through Reddit, as I often did to pass the time. I came across a post where someone was asking for advice on starting an online business. The post wasn't anything groundbreaking, but it planted a seed in my mind. I started looking into ways people were making money online, and that's when I stumbled upon dropshipping. For those who aren't familiar, dropshipping is a retail fulfillment method where the store doesn't keep the products it sells in stock. Instead, when a customer makes an order, the product is purchased from a third party and shipped directly to the customer. It seemed simple enough. No need to worry about inventory, no upfront investment in product, and all you needed was a website and some marketing know-how. I thought, why not give it a shot? The next few months were spent learning everything I could about dropshipping. I watched hours of YouTube tutorials, read blog posts, and joined countless online communities where people shared their experiences. It was overwhelming, but the more I learned, the more excited I became. It felt like there was this whole world of opportunities just waiting for me to tap into it. But the thing about entrepreneurship is that it's never as easy as it seems. My first attempt at starting a dropshipping store was a disaster. I picked a niche I thought was trendy, customized pet products, and launched a website. I spent a few $100 on Facebook ads, set up a pretty decent-looking store, and waited for the sales to roll in. Spoiler alert, they didn't. I got 0 sales. Zilch. Not even a single click on my ads. It was a punch to the gut. But I wasn't ready to give up. I went back to the drawing board and started asking myself what I was doing wrong. The biggest mistake I made, I realized, was not doing enough research on my target market. I thought pet owners would be a large enough group to target, but I hadn't honed in on a specific segment. Plus, I wasn't optimizing my website for conversions, and my ad campaigns were far too broad. I knew I had to refine my approach, so I took another month to redo everything. This time, I narrowed my focus and built a niche around personalized pet accessories, things like engraved collars and custom pet bowls. I also revamped my website, hired a designer to make it look more professional, and refined my Facebook ad strategy. I also started learning about SEO and content marketing to help bring in organic traffic, instead of relying solely on paid ads. Then, something amazing happened. My first sale came in. I couldn't believe it at first. It was a rush of excitement and relief, like I'd finally cracked the code. I couldn't let myself get too excited, though. I knew this was just the beginning, and I had a long way to go. I didn't even make a huge profit from that first sale, but it was enough to fuel my belief that this was actually possible. Over the next few months, I worked tirelessly to improve my store. I ran experiments with different ad creatives, tested pricing strategies, and experimented with various customer service approaches. Slowly but surely, my sales started increasing. I was still working full-time at my corporate job, but I'd spend every evening and weekend working on my dropshipping store, tweaking and improving every aspect of it. By 2018, my store was generating a steady income. I was nowhere near quitting my day job, but I could see a real path forward. I started taking on additional challenges, like scaling up my advertising and expanding my product range. By the end of the year, my store was making more money than my full-time job. I was making enough to cover my expenses, pay off some debt, and still have a little extra to reinvest into the business. It was around that time that I realized something important. Entrepreneurship isn't about having a great idea right off the bat. It's about persistence. I wasn't the most talented, the smartest, or the most innovative, but I was willing to fail, learn from my mistakes, and keep improving. Every mistake I made was just another lesson, another step closer to success. Then, in 2019, things started to really take off. My store became profitable enough that I felt comfortable leaving my corporate job. It was a scary decision. I'd never known anything other than a steady paycheck, but I knew it was the right time. My business was growing rapidly, and I wanted to be fully committed to it. Making the leap to full-time entrepreneurship was a huge risk, but it was also exhilarating. I had to learn how to manage all aspects of the business: customer service, order fulfillment, marketing, and even finances. It was overwhelming at times, but I thrived on the challenge. Every day was different, and I loved the feeling of autonomy that came with being my own boss. The next couple of years were a blur. I scaled my business by expanding into new markets, hiring employees, and diversifying my product offerings. I also began focusing on branding and creating a loyal customer base, rather than just relying on paid ads. I invested in email marketing, influencer collaborations, and content creation. Slowly, my brand began to grow beyond just a dropshipping store. It was no longer just about products. It was about building a community of pet lovers who believed in what I was offering. As my business grew, I started working with other entrepreneurs. I helped mentor people who were just starting out, sharing the lessons I'd learned from my mistakes and successes. It felt great to give back and be part of a larger entrepreneurial community. Fast forward to 2025, and I'm now running a multi-million-dollar business. I'm still in the pet product industry, but my focus has expanded. We now offer everything from pet care services to custom pet insurance. I've got a full team behind me, and we're looking to expand into international markets. It hasn't always been easy, but I can confidently say that I'm living a life I never thought was possible when I was sitting in that corporate office, dreaming of something more. Looking back, I realized that entrepreneurship isn't a straight line. It's a winding road filled with failures, successes, and everything in between. But if you stick with it, if you keep learning, adapting, and pushing forward, you'll find success. And when it finally comes, it's sweeter than you could have ever imagined. So, if you're reading this and thinking about starting your own business, my advice is simple. Just start. Don't wait for the perfect idea or the perfect moment. Embrace the mess, learn from your mistakes, and keep pushing forward. You never know where it could take you. This is the story of how I built a small business from scratch with $1,000 and turned it into a profitable brand. It's not one of those overnight success stories. In fact, I almost gave up multiple times, and there were plenty of moments when it seemed like everything was falling apart. But I kept pushing through because I knew I couldn't go back to the grind of working for someone else. Let me start at the beginning. I was in my late 20s, living in a small apartment in a city I loved but couldn't quite afford. I was working at a 9-to-5 job, doing digital marketing for a small firm. The work wasn't terrible, but I wasn't passionate about it. Every morning, I felt like I was trading my time for a paycheck, and that just didn't sit right with me. The company wasn't doing badly, but it also wasn't thriving. It felt like I was stuck in the middle of nowhere, and I started to think, what if I could do this on my own? It wasn't like I had some big plan or a unique skill set. I didn't have a tech background, and I wasn't some business genius. But I was good at research, and I had a knack for marketing. So, I thought, why not start a side hustle? Something that could eventually replace my job. I started brainstorming ideas, but nothing clicked right away. I toyed with a few things, selling on Etsy, starting a blog, dropshipping, but everything felt like a rehash of something that already existed. It wasn't until I stumbled on the idea of custom t-shirts that things started to fall into place. I'd always been into design, though I never considered myself an artist. One night, as I was scrolling through Instagram, I saw these custom t-shirts being sold by small brands that were doing really well. I'd seen them before, but this time, something clicked. I could do that. I had a decent knowledge of graphic design software, and I figured I could learn how to set up an online store. If I could just find a niche, I could carve out a space for myself. But how? I wasn't sure, but I knew I had to start somewhere. The first step was gathering information. I spent the next couple of weeks researching everything I could about the print-on-demand business model. It seemed like the perfect fit for someone like me. I didn't need to invest in inventory, warehouse space, or deal with shipping. Instead, I could create designs, upload them to a platform, and let the service handle production and fulfillment. All I needed was an idea, a platform, and a bit of marketing. By the time I was ready to take the plunge, I had exactly $1,000 saved up. This wasn't a lot of money, but I knew it was enough to get started. I didn't want to dip into my savings or go into debt, so I made a decision. I was going to be scrappy. I would bootstrap this thing and learn as I went. I signed up for Printful, a popular print-on-demand service, and set up a Shopify store. The first few days were a blur. I spent hours designing t-shirts, coming up with slogans, and picking out colors and fonts. The designs weren't anything special at first. They were just simple, clean, and trendy. I didn't have a huge budget for ads, so I knew I'd have to be creative in how I marketed the shirts. I also spent a lot of time on social media. Instagram and Facebook became my primary tools for reaching an audience. I started by creating an Instagram account dedicated to my brand, sharing pictures of my designs and reposting customer photos. I did everything I could to make the page look polished, even though it was just me doing everything. I reached out to influencers in the fashion and lifestyle niche, offering them a free shirt in exchange for a post. I didn't expect much, but I figured it was worth a shot. To my surprise, one influencer agreed to post about the shirt. Her post got a couple of hundred likes, and that was enough to drive some traffic to my store. And then something happened. A couple of days later, a small order came in. Someone had bought 2 shirts. It wasn't much, but it felt like a huge win. I remember refreshing my email inbox every few minutes, waiting for the next sale. And then it came. Another order. And another. Slowly, but steadily, I was seeing momentum. But with that momentum came a whole new set of problems. As orders started coming in, I realized just how much work I had to do. I was still working full-time, so I'd spend my evenings and weekends designing new shirts, handling customer service, and posting on social media. It was exhausting, but I couldn't stop. The business was growing, and it felt like it was becoming real. There were some tough moments along the way, though. I remember getting my first bad review. It crushed me. The customer had received a shirt that wasn't exactly what they expected, and they left a scathing review. It was a blow to my confidence, and I seriously thought about quitting. But I knew I had to learn from it. I reached out to the customer, apologized, and offered a full refund. It wasn't easy, but that experience taught me the importance of customer service and the need to constantly improve. As the months passed, my business continued to grow. I learned more about how to use Facebook ads effectively, and I experimented with running targeted campaigns. I found that my audience was really into motivational quotes and minimalist designs, so I doubled down on that niche. I also started offering discounts and running sales, which helped boost sales during slower periods. By the end of the first year, I was pulling in enough revenue to quit my job. The transition wasn't easy. Leaving the stability of a full-time job to become a full-time entrepreneur was terrifying. But I knew I couldn't go back. I had finally built something that was mine. I had created a brand that resonated with people, and I was making money doing something I loved. In the second year, things really took off. I hired a small team to help with customer service and order fulfillment, and I was able to focus more on scaling the business. We expanded the product line, adding hoodies, mugs, and phone cases. We also launched a website redesign to make the store more user-friendly. Now, looking back on those early days, it's incredible to see how far the business has come. What started with $1,000 and a few basic designs is now a profitable, established brand. We've had collaborations with influencers, sold thousands of products, and built a loyal customer base. The lessons I've learned along the way are countless, but if I could give one piece of advice to anyone thinking of starting their own business, it would be this: don't be afraid to start small. Don't wait for the perfect idea or the perfect moment. Just begin, and keep going even when it feels like nothing is happening. Progress is often invisible, but it adds up over time. If I'd given up after that first bad review, or after the countless moments of doubt, I wouldn't be where I am today. But I didn't, and here I am, still pushing forward, still learning, and still growing. So if you're sitting there with an idea, wondering if it's worth it to take the leap, trust me, it is. It's worth every late night, every frustrating moment, and every step of the journey. Because when you're the one calling the shots, it all becomes worth it. And who knows? You might just create something amazing. I've been running a small but growing tech startup for the past 5 years. It all started with a simple idea, a passion for innovation, and a ton of late-night spin in my cramped apartment. It wasn't easy, but looking back, the journey has been nothing short of transformative. This is the story of how I turned my side project into a full-fledged business, and the ups and downs that came with it. It all began when I was working at a mid-tier software company. I had a decent job, a steady income, and a stable future ahead of me. But there was always a gnawing feeling that I wasn't living up to my potential. The company I worked for wasn't particularly innovative, and the work was repetitive. I knew I had ideas, skills, and the drive to do something bigger, but I didn't know what that something was yet. One evening, I was talking to a friend at a bar when we stumbled upon a discussion about the inefficiencies in the project management tools that many businesses used. The conversation sparked something in me. For months, I had been frustrated with the software I was using at work. It was clunky, counterintuitive, and lacked many features I thought were essential. I wondered, what if I could create something better? What if there was a tool that not only helped teams manage projects more efficiently but also focused on user experience? I started sketching ideas for a new project management tool that would focus on simplicity, speed, and collaboration. I spent the next few weeks researching the market, trying to figure out what was missing and what I could do differently. I discovered a lot of similar tools existed, but none of them seemed to really nail the all-in-one experience for small teams. With that, I decided to take the plunge. I quit my job and poured all my savings into developing a prototype. It was terrifying, but the thought of creating something from scratch that could genuinely help people pushed me forward. I worked from my small apartment, coding late into the night and learning as much as I could about everything from UI/UX design to business strategy. I was a one-man army at first, wearing every hat: developer, designer, marketer, and support. The early days were full of struggle. I had no investors, no backup plan, and barely any technical resources. My first prototype was ugly as sin. It was slow, buggy, and barely functional. But it worked enough to demonstrate my idea. I sent it out to a few small businesses I knew, offering them a free trial in exchange for feedback. The response was overwhelmingly positive, though the product was far from perfect. People liked the simplicity of the interface and the promise of improving team collaboration. They were interested but hesitant to pay for something that wasn't fully fleshed out yet. I took their feedback seriously, worked tirelessly to fix bugs, and added features that I knew would address their pain points. I didn't have a lot of money to spend on marketing, so I focused on building a community around the product. I engaged with users on forums, created blog posts about productivity, and posted on social media. Slowly but surely, my tool started to get noticed. After about 6 months, I had a small but dedicated group of users who loved the product and were willing to pay for it. But success didn't come overnight. The first year was tough. I had days where I doubted myself, wondering if I had made a huge mistake. I was surviving on a shoestring budget, paying for hosting, and keeping the lights on by working odd jobs in my spare time. There were times when I couldn't afford to pay myself, and I was just scraping by. Despite the difficulties, there was one thing that kept me going: the belief that I was building something valuable. Every time a user sent me a message about how the product had helped their team work better, it motivated me to keep going. Slowly, the user base grew. At one point, I reached 100 paying customers. It felt like a huge victory. But even with some momentum, I knew I needed to scale the business. I couldn't continue doing everything on my own. I needed a team, resources, and capital to take it to the next level. That's when I started seeking out investors. I attended pitch events, networked with people in the tech industry, and spent hours perfecting my pitch. I faced a lot of rejection, but I kept pushing forward. It wasn't until I met a group of angel investors who believed in my vision that I finally got the funding I needed. With that investment, I hired a small team and focused on improving the product. We worked tirelessly on refining the interface, adding new features, and improving the overall experience. As the product became more polished, we expanded our marketing efforts, reaching a wider audience through ads and partnerships. Our user base grew exponentially, and soon enough, we had thousands of customers. By the time the company hit its third year, we had become a recognizable name in the project management space. We were no longer a small startup operating out of my apartment. We had a full-fledged office, a team of developers, designers, and marketers, and a solid customer base that included large enterprises. But just as things were looking up, we faced a major setback. One of our competitors, a much larger company, launched a similar product that seemed to have every feature we had. They had the resources to push their product into the mainstream, and we were suddenly faced with the challenge of keeping up. I remember sitting with my team, discussing what to do next. We could either try to match their every move or double down on what made us unique. We chose the latter. Instead of competing feature by feature, we focused on what set us apart: our community, our simplicity, and our customer support. We made a commitment to deliver an unparalleled user experience. We introduced a series of webinars and tutorials to help customers get the most out of our platform. We also started offering personalized onboarding for larger clients to ensure they felt truly supported. Over the next year, we began to see our customer retention rate rise, and our user base continued to grow. We didn't have the massive marketing budgets that our competitors did, but we had something that they didn't: a personal touch. Our customers loved the fact that they could easily get in touch with us and that we genuinely cared about their success. Today, 5 years after that conversation in the bar, I'm proud of what we've built. We've reached over 20,000 paying customers, secured another round of funding, and have expanded into several international markets. The company is still growing, and we continue to push the boundaries of what's possible in project management. Looking back, I'm grateful for every challenge, every sleepless night, and every moment of doubt. Without those early struggles, I wouldn't have learned what it takes to succeed in business. It's not about having the best product from the start. It's about persevering, staying true to your vision, and constantly improving. So if you're thinking about starting your own business, my advice is simple: be patient, be relentless, and never lose sight of your passion. The road will be tough, but if you stay focused and believe in what you're doing, you can achieve great things. Trust me, the hard work is worth it. I remember the day I started my business like it was yesterday. It wasn't a grand vision or a light bulb moment. There was no eureka insight, no huge investment, no risky leap of faith. It all started with a very simple problem, one that, to this day, a lot of people still face. It was the summer of 2014, and I was 24 years old, living in a small, quiet town. I had recently graduated from college with a degree in marketing. For all the pomp and circumstance around graduation day, I found myself in a bit of a rut. No job offers had come through, and my student loans were steadily accumulating. My social media feeds were filled with people who seemed to be living their dream lives, securing fancy jobs, traveling the world, and living in places I could only fantasize about. I wasn't in a bad place. I was working part-time at a local coffee shop to pay the bills, but the uncertainty about my future started to weigh on me. That's when I decided to take a small step. I decided I would solve one simple problem: make some extra money by doing something people needed. So, I started freelancing in my free time, offering social media management and content creation for small businesses. It was nothing flashy. I was making enough to cover some of my bills, but deep down I knew I had to grow my income if I wanted more stability. After about a year, I stumbled upon a problem that seemed obvious in hindsight but was frustrating at the time. A lot of businesses, especially in my small town, were struggling with a basic issue: their websites and online presence were outdated or simply non-existent. Small business owners often lack the technical skills or the budget to build something that could compete in an increasingly digital world. I started reaching out to them with ideas, simple suggestions, like building a website or offering social media marketing tips. Many were interested, but the cost of hiring someone to do it professionally was often out of their reach. That's when I got the idea. If I could help them build an online presence without charging an arm and a leg, I might be able to corner a niche market. I began offering low-cost website development services, focusing primarily on small businesses in my area. At first, it was slow. I spent countless hours watching YouTube tutorials, reading blog posts, and testing code. I spent my evenings designing, testing, and working on my own website, perfecting my pitch. It was a grind, but slowly, I started to get my first few clients. One of my earliest clients was a local bakery. They didn't even have a website, and the owner was running her business largely through Facebook posts and word of mouth. She was skeptical at first, but after a couple of meetings, we agreed on a price, and I went to work on her website. It wasn't anything groundbreaking, just a simple, clean design with an online menu and contact info. I was thrilled when it was finished. But the real magic happened when I linked the bakery's Instagram account to the website. We added some fun, interactive features, and even made it mobile-friendly, something I learned was crucial but not always a given in 2015. Within a week, foot traffic increased, and people were talking about how easy it was to find the bakery online. She was ecstatic, and that's when I knew I had stumbled on something. By 2016, I had gained a small, but steady, following. My portfolio was growing, and word of mouth was my best marketing tool. But there was a problem. I wasn't scaling. I was constantly working on client websites, dealing with everything from design to development to content writing. I quickly hit a ceiling. There were only so many hours in the day. That's when I decided to make a pivotal change. I hired my first employee. At first, I didn't know what I was doing. Hiring someone felt like a leap of faith. I wasn't sure if I could afford it or if it would even help, but I was drowning in work. I needed someone who could take over some of the design work, so I posted a job listing and soon hired a freelance web designer named Lily. She was a game changer. Lily helped streamline processes. She brought fresh ideas to the table and started taking over most of the day-to-day design tasks, allowing me to focus on project management and sales. With her on board, I started to feel like my business was truly growing. But even with the added help, I still faced another challenge. How could I stand out in a sea of other freelancers and agencies? That's when I realized that I wasn't just selling websites, I was selling a solution to a problem. The best way to market this wasn't by listing features or quoting prices, but by telling stories of how I'd helped real businesses. I started putting together case studies, showing before and after pictures of websites, and sharing testimonials from clients. People loved it. Slowly, my reputation as the go-to person for small businesses' online needs grew. The big turning point came in 2017, when I took a gamble and launched a course on web design for small business owners. I spent months putting it together, creating videos, worksheets, and templates. It wasn't something I had done before, and I wasn't sure anyone would buy it, but I figured it was worth trying. The course was a hit. Within the first few weeks, I made more than I had in an entire month of client work. That was a game changer. It was the first time I realized that scaling didn't just mean taking on more clients, it meant creating products that could sell to a wider audience. From there, everything changed. I reinvested the money from the course into building a larger team. I hired content writers, marketing specialists, and even more designers. With a larger team, we could take on bigger projects and offer more comprehensive services, from full website design to ongoing social media management. We were no longer a small operation. We were becoming a real business. Looking back on it now, it feels surreal to think about where I started. The little freelance gigs I did on the side back in 2014 turned into a full-fledged company that's now operating nationally, with a team of over 30 people and a steady stream of clients. The road wasn't easy, and there were plenty of sleepless nights and moments where I doubted myself. But each challenge taught me something, and each victory kept me going. If there's one thing I've learned in my entrepreneurial journey, it's that it's not about having a grand plan from day one. It's about solving a real problem, sticking with it, and adapting along the way. Today, I'm not just a business owner. I'm an entrepreneur who's learned that success comes from consistent effort, learning from mistakes, and most importantly, providing value. As I sit here writing this, I feel a sense of pride, but also gratitude for the people who helped me along the way, from Lily, my first hire, to the clients who believed in me when I was just starting out. Each of them played a role in helping me become who I am today. If you're out there wondering if it's possible to go from struggling to make ends meet to running a business, the answer is yes. It won't happen overnight, and it will take more effort than you ever imagined, but it's worth it. I promise you that. Hey, friends, if you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. I still remember the day I got the call that changed everything. It was late in the afternoon, and I was sitting in my tiny apartment in the city, scrolling through job listings. I had graduated from college 2 years earlier with a degree in marketing, but nothing in the field seemed to be working out. I had applied for countless positions, attended endless interviews, and had only gotten rejection after rejection. It was a tough time. My savings were running low, and I was struggling to figure out what my next step would be. I had been toying with the idea of starting my own business for a while. Ever since I was a kid, I had been passionate about helping people and solving problems. I remember making little crafts and selling them in the neighborhood, earning a few bucks here and there. The spark for entrepreneurship was always there, but I never had the confidence to pursue it full-time. The fear of failure loomed over me constantly. But that day, something changed. The call was from a small startup that I had applied to months before. They were offering me a position. But here's the kicker, it wasn't the type of role I had applied for. They wanted me to come in as a co-founder. I was shocked. They had liked my resume and my entrepreneurial spirit, but more than that, they believed in my potential to help grow their business. It was a game changer. I'd never heard of this company before, but they had a unique product, an eco-friendly, sustainable alternative to traditional packaging. The idea itself was brilliant, but they needed someone who could help them get it off the ground. And they thought I was the right person. I didn't hesitate. I was in. No questions asked. Fast forward to today, and that decision has shaped my entire life. Looking back, I can't help but feel a mixture of disbelief and pride at how far we've come. But I also remember how naive I was when I started out. Running a business isn't as glamorous as it seems on social media or in those motivational YouTube videos. The reality is messy, frustrating, and often lonely. But it's also one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. When I first started with the company, we were just a handful of people working out of a shared office space. We didn't have a lot of money, but we had passion. That's what kept us going in the beginning, passion and a belief in what we were doing. We knew we were onto something big, but there were times when it felt like we were barely treading water. The first challenge was product development. It seemed like every time we thought we had a solution, something would go wrong. The initial prototypes of our packaging were too expensive to produce, or they didn't perform the way we expected. We spent months iterating, trying new materials, adjusting designs, and testing until we finally found the right balance of cost-effectiveness, sustainability, and quality. During this period, I remember spending countless nights in the office, sitting with the team, trying to troubleshoot issues. We didn't have the luxury of hiring a big staff of experts, so we had to wear many hats. I was managing marketing, product development, and customer relations, all while trying to keep the team motivated. There were moments when I felt like I couldn't do it anymore. The pressure was overwhelming, and I was running on fumes. But every time I thought about quitting, I remembered why I started in the first place. The belief that we could make a difference in the world kept me going. One of the biggest turning points for our company came when we secured our first major client. We had been pitching our product to local businesses for months, and finally, a mid-sized company that specialized in eco-friendly products decided to take a chance on us. It wasn't a huge deal in terms of revenue, but it gave us the credibility we needed. More importantly, it opened the door to other opportunities. We used that success to build our reputation, and over time, more clients began to take us seriously. But it wasn't just about getting clients, it was about building relationships with them. I focused heavily on customer service, making sure that every client we worked with felt valued. I'd personally reach out to check in with them, gather feedback, and make improvements. I believed that this attention to detail was what would set us apart from our competitors. Then came the next big hurdle, scaling. As the demand for our product grew, we needed to expand our team and production capacity. But how do you scale without overextending yourself and running out of cash? This was a crucial moment. We needed to secure funding, but the idea of giving away equity in our company terrified me. I had built this business from the ground up, and the thought of losing control was unsettling. But I knew that to grow, we needed capital. We started talking to venture capitalists, angels, and potential investors. The process was grueling. The first few meetings ended in rejection, and it was discouraging. But then, we finally found a group of investors who shared our vision. They saw the potential in what we were doing, and they believed in us. They didn't just offer us money, they offered guidance, mentorship, and the kind of support that allowed us to grow faster than we ever imagined. With the funding in place, we were able to expand our operations. We hired more people, invested in better technology, and started expanding into new markets. But scaling a business isn't just about money and resources. It's about maintaining the same core values that got you to this point in the first place. For us, that meant never losing sight of our mission to make the world more sustainable. We kept pushing the boundaries of what we could do, constantly looking for new ways to innovate. Now, after 5 years of growth, we're a team of over 50 people, and our products are used by companies all over the world. We've grown exponentially, but we've also maintained the integrity and passion that got us started in the first place. We're still focused on sustainability, and we've expanded into creating eco-friendly solutions for everything from shipping to food packaging. And it feels surreal to look back at where we started, a tiny office, a few people, and a dream, and see how far we've come. But the journey hasn't been without its struggles. We've faced financial hardships, employee turnover, product failures, and countless moments of doubt. There have been sleepless nights, tough decisions, and times when I wasn't sure if we'd make it through. But every setback taught us something valuable, and every victory felt even sweeter because of the hard work that went into it. Now, I often think back to the day I got that call, the call that set everything in motion. It's funny how life works. At the time, I felt like I was at the end of my rope, but that call was just the beginning of something amazing. And looking back, I wouldn't change a thing. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to run a business. Growing up, I always thought I'd be the one stuck working for someone else, just doing the 9-to-5 grind. But here I am now, a CEO of a growing startup that's been running for almost 5 years. It's crazy to think about how everything unfolded. My story begins in a small town, where the only real option for a career seemed to be joining the family business. My father was a mechanic, and everyone in the family worked in the shop. My childhood was filled with the smell of motor oil and the sound of power tools. I remember being about 10 years old when I first got my hands dirty, helping out with simple tasks, running to get tools, and learning the basics of fixing cars. It was a good life, I guess, and everyone in town respected my family. But from a young age, I knew that I wanted something different. I didn't want to follow in my dad's footsteps. It wasn't that I didn't respect what he did. He worked incredibly hard, and the shop was successful, but I wanted more than what the small-town life offered. I wanted to build something from scratch, something that wasn't tied to the past but looked toward the future. After high school, I made the difficult decision to leave the family business and go to college in a nearby city. I studied computer science, figuring that tech was where the future was headed. At first, my parents didn't understand. They thought I was abandoning the family, that I was making a mistake. But I was determined. College was tough, especially in those early days when I didn't have much money. I was living off ramen noodles and working part-time as a waiter to make ends meet. It was during one of my late-night study sessions that I first came up with the idea for my business. I had just finished a grueling exam, and I needed a break. I decided to check out some forums, and that's when I stumbled upon a thread about productivity tools. It was filled with discussions about the apps people use to stay organized, track tasks, and manage time. Everyone had their own system, but there wasn't one tool that combined everything in a way that made sense to most people. There were tons of apps that handled a single aspect of productivity, but none that handled it all in one place. That's when it clicked. I could build an app that streamlined task management, time tracking, and communication into one seamless platform. It would be simple, intuitive, and, most importantly, it would solve a real problem people faced. The more I thought about it, the more excited I got. It felt like the perfect opportunity to combine my skills and tech with my desire to create something meaningful. Of course, there were some hurdles. For one, I didn't have any money to fund the development of the app. I was still in college, and while I had some experience with coding, I didn't know how to design a polished product or market it. I knew that I needed help, so I reached out to a few friends I had made in college who were also tech-savvy. Some of them were already working on side projects, so I pitched them the idea of building the app with me. At first, they were skeptical. After all, we were just college students with no business experience. But something about the idea resonated with them, and they agreed to help. We started working on the app in our spare time. It wasn't easy. We worked long hours, often sacrificing weekends and sleep to get things done. But as we built it, I became more and more confident that we were onto something special. I began doing research on the competition, figuring out what other apps were doing and how we could improve on them. I also spent time talking to people, students, professionals, anyone who would listen, about what they wanted in a productivity tool. The feedback we got helped shape the final product. Eventually, we had a beta version of the app. It wasn't perfect, but it worked, and we were ready to put it out there. We launched it on a few tech forums and shared it with friends and family. The response was overwhelming. People loved it. It wasn't just another app. It was a tool that genuinely made their lives easier. But we weren't done yet. We needed to make it better, faster, and more feature-rich. At this point, we knew we had something, but we didn't have the funds to scale the business. I reached out to a few investors, but they weren't interested. They didn't see the potential in our idea. They told me we were too young, too inexperienced, and that there were already too many apps in the market. It was disheartening, but I didn't give up. Instead, I turned to crowdfunding. I launched a campaign, explaining the vision for the app and how it would help people be more productive. To my surprise, we raised more than enough money to take the project to the next level. With the funding secured, we hired a team of designers and developers to help improve the app. We also invested in marketing, learning how to promote our product effectively. The journey wasn't without its setbacks, of course. We faced bugs, design issues, and moments where we wondered if it was all worth it. But through it all, I kept reminding myself of why I started in the first place, to create something meaningful. Fast forward to today, and the app has over 100,000 active users. We've expanded the team, and the business is profitable. We're not a huge company, but we're growing steadily, and we've built a loyal customer base that believes in our product. Looking back, I can't believe how far we've come. It's been a roller coaster ride, but it's been worth every sleepless night, every moment of doubt, and every challenge we faced along the way. If there's one thing I've learned through this journey, it's that perseverance is everything. There were countless times when I thought about giving up, especially when things weren't going as planned. But every time I felt like quitting, I reminded myself why I started. And in the end, that's what kept me going. Starting a business is never easy, but if you truly believe in your idea and are willing to put in the work, anything is possible. I always thought being an entrepreneur was something reserved for people who had it all figured out, the ones with fancy degrees, a big network, or someone who could finance their crazy ideas. I had none of those things. But I was stubborn, maybe to a fault, and it turned out that stubbornness was what got me to where I am today. It all started back in 2013, when I was fresh out of college, broke, and living with my parents in a small town in the Midwest. I had a degree in marketing, but I wasn't sure what to do with it. I knew I didn't want a 9-to-5 job in a cubicle. The idea of sitting in front of a computer all day made me feel trapped. But I also didn't want to be like one of those people who spent years figuring things out while their life passed them by. I wanted to build something. I wanted to create something from scratch. At the time, I had a friend, Josh, who had started a small social media management business. Josh was the kind of person who seemed to make things happen effortlessly. He would always tell me, if you have a passion, figure out how to monetize it. So, I began thinking. I had no tech skills, no product ideas, and definitely no startup capital. But I had a love for coffee. I drank it every day, sometimes more than once. And in my town, there was only one small local coffee shop. The idea came to me like a lightning bolt. Why not open a coffee subscription service that delivered freshly roasted coffee to people's doors? I had no experience in the coffee business, but I was obsessed with the idea. I started researching everything I could about coffee beans, roasters, packaging, branding, and subscription models. For months, I devoured articles, watched YouTube videos, and read every blog post I could find. I even visited coffee roasters in nearby cities, asking tons of questions, taking notes, and learning as much as I could. Of course, the first obstacle was money. I had no savings to speak of. My parents were supportive, but they weren't exactly in a position to fund a risky business venture. So, I started small. I began working odd jobs, freelance writing, babysitting, even walking dogs. I did everything I could to save up the $1,000 I needed to get started. Finally, after months of scraping together every penny, I had enough to buy some basic equipment and start small-scale production. I rented a tiny office space in an old building on the outskirts of town, far from the bright lights and hustle of the city. It was a huge leap for me, but in hindsight, I was naive enough to think it would work without much hassle. My first step was to get the coffee. I contacted a local roaster who had a good reputation and offered to buy their beans wholesale. The roaster seemed skeptical about the idea of me starting a coffee subscription service with no experience, but he agreed to give me a shot. The next hurdle was packaging. I couldn't afford fancy bags or anything high-end, so I went with simple, craft paper bags, stamped with my own logo that I had designed on a free website. They weren't pretty, but they were functional. I quickly realized that building a brand didn't require fancy packaging, but it did require an authentic story. So, I worked hard on my brand message, focusing on how my coffee was not just a product, but an experience, something that could bring a bit of joy to people's day. I built a website using a free template and did all the marketing myself. I had no budget for ads, so I relied on social media. I started posting pictures of my coffee, telling stories about the people behind the beans, and sharing snippets of my entrepreneurial journey. I'm not going to lie, it was a struggle. For the first few months, I was getting maybe 1 or 2 orders a week. And when I say orders, I mean friends and family helping me out so I didn't completely fail. But I kept at it. Every time someone subscribed, I felt like I was one step closer to making this thing real. The key was consistency. I kept posting, kept sharing, kept learning. I didn't have the luxury of a big marketing budget, so I focused on building a genuine community. Slowly, people started noticing. A few influencers with decent followings picked up on my brand, and my little coffee business started gaining traction. At some point, the business hit a tipping point. I don't know exactly when it happened, but one month, the orders exploded. I went from shipping out a handful of orders a week to dozens in a single day. The growth was exciting, but it was also overwhelming. I was still working out of that tiny office, doing everything myself, roasting the beans, packaging, shipping, customer service, and marketing. The late nights were exhausting, and the pressure was immense. But every time I wanted to give up, I reminded myself that I had come too far to quit. In 2015, I took a leap and moved my business to a bigger warehouse, hired my first employee, and started scaling up. The problem now wasn't getting customers, it was keeping up with the demand. I had to refine my systems, automate as much as I could, and train people to help with the operational side of things. That's when I learned one of the most important lessons of entrepreneurship. Growth is great, but it can break you if you're not prepared for it. By 2017, my subscription service was profitable. We were delivering coffee to thousands of customers across the country. And, I'll admit, there were moments when I stopped and thought to myself, how did I get here? It wasn't just the money, though that was nice. It was the fact that I had created something from nothing. I'd taken an idea, worked tirelessly, and turned it into a successful business. I had failed 100 times along the way, but I had learned from each failure. The hardest part of my journey was learning to let go. I had been a one-person operation for so long that I found it hard to delegate and trust other people to do things. But eventually, I brought in a team, and the business started to scale even faster. As we expanded, I learned that running a business wasn't just about the product. It was about the people you work with and how you treat your customers. I spent a lot of time thinking about how I wanted my company to be perceived, what values I wanted it to embody. We focused on sustainability, fair trade, and building meaningful relationships with our suppliers and customers. Now, in 2025, the business is thriving. We've expanded internationally, and we've even launched a line of coffee-related products. But the journey wasn't without its bumps. I learned the hard way that entrepreneurship is never linear. There are ups and downs, moments of doubt, and failures that feel like they'll break you. But if you're willing to keep going, even when it feels impossible, you'll find that success doesn't come from avoiding failure, it comes from pushing through it. Looking back, I realized the most important thing I did was to start. It didn't matter that I didn't have all the answers or the resources. The key was to take that first step, to be willing to fail and learn, and to never, ever give up. If I can do it, anyone can. It's funny how life can turn out when you least expect it. My name is Jason, and my journey to entrepreneurship was anything but conventional. For a long time, I was stuck in a rut, feeling like I was going through the motions without any real purpose. But all that changed when I decided to take a risk, and it turned out to be the best decision I ever made. Here's the story of how I went from being stuck in a dead-end job to running a successful business. I grew up in a small town where the idea of becoming an entrepreneur was as foreign to most people as going to the moon. My parents worked regular 9-to-5 jobs, and most of the people I knew followed the same predictable path: school, college, job, family. So, like most people, I followed that path and ended up in a job I didn't care about, working for a company that treated me like just another cog in the machine. For years, I worked as a project manager at a mid-sized tech company. It wasn't the worst job in the world, but it was far from fulfilling. I spent my days sitting in meetings, sending emails, and doing tasks that felt like they didn't really matter. My salary was decent, and I had a steady paycheck, but deep down, I knew I wasn't truly happy. I felt like I was just going through the motions of life, waiting for something to change. I had always been interested in technology, and I spent a lot of my free time tinkering with gadgets and software. In fact, I built a couple of websites and even started a small YouTube channel to share some of my projects. But I never took it seriously enough to turn it into a business. I thought it was just a hobby, something to keep me busy in the evenings. That all changed one night when I was having a conversation with a friend, Mark. Mark and I had been friends for years, and he was always a bit of a risk-taker. While I was playing it safe in my corporate job, Mark had recently quit his job and started a small e-commerce business. At the time, I thought he was crazy. The world of e-commerce seemed like a massive risk, and I didn't have the guts to jump into something that uncertain. But Mark had a way of making things sound exciting. We were sitting at a bar, having a couple of beers, when he started talking about his business. "It's not easy," he said, "but it's the best decision I've ever made. I get to work for myself, set my own hours, and do something I'm passionate about. It's hard, but it's worth it." His words stuck with me. I had never really thought about running my own business before, but as he talked, I realized something. I was so unhappy in my job, and here was someone who had taken the leap and was actually doing something that brought him joy. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I wanted to experience that same sense of freedom and fulfillment. I spent the next few weeks thinking about it. I kept asking myself the same question: what's the worst that could happen? I didn't have a family to support, no major financial obligations. If I failed, I could always go back to another corporate job. I was already stuck in a job I hated, so what did I have to lose? After a lot of thinking, I finally made the decision. I quit my job. I know, it sounds like a crazy move, especially since I didn't have a clear business plan in mind, but sometimes you just have to take a leap of faith. I had always been interested in building websites, so I figured I could start offering web design services. It wasn't the most original idea, but I figured I could do it better than most people in my area. The thing about web design is that it's not just about building a website. It's about understanding a client's vision and turning it into something real. I had spent years working with clients in my corporate job, so I had a decent understanding of how to manage projects and communicate effectively. I started small, reaching out to local businesses and offering my services. At first, I didn't get much traction, but I didn't let that discourage me. I spent hours each day improving my skills, learning about SEO, digital marketing, and everything else I could get my hands on. Slowly but surely, I started landing clients. They weren't big clients, but they were enough to get me going. One of my first clients was a small coffee shop in town. They had a basic website, but it was outdated and didn't really reflect their brand. I spent a week redesigning it, making sure the site was mobile-friendly, easy to navigate, and visually appealing. When I showed it to them, they were blown away. The owner was so impressed that she referred me to a few other local businesses, and that's when things really started to snowball. I kept working hard, taking on more clients, and refining my processes. The more I worked, the more I learned, and the better I became. It wasn't always easy. There were plenty of late nights and moments of doubt, but I kept pushing forward because I knew I was building something important. Slowly, I started to realize that I had built a business, not just a side hustle. As my reputation grew, I began to scale up. I hired a couple of freelance designers and developers to help with larger projects, and I started offering more services, like social media management and content creation. I also began to raise my prices, which, surprisingly, didn't scare clients away. In fact, I found that as my prices went up, the quality of clients I attracted improved as well. I started working with larger businesses and even a few startups, which was a huge confidence booster. Now, almost 4 years later, I'm running a full-fledged digital marketing agency. I've been able to quit my side gigs and focus solely on the business. I've hired a team of 10 people, and we're expanding every year. I've learned so much along the way about business, about myself, and about the importance of taking risks. Looking back, I can't believe how far I've come. I went from being a project manager in a job I hated to running my own business that I'm genuinely passionate about. I don't have it all figured out, and there are still plenty of challenges ahead, but I'm proud of what I've built. Most importantly, I'm happy. I'm doing something I love. I'm my own boss, and I get to help other businesses succeed in the process. I guess the moral of the story is this: if you're unhappy with where you are in life, it's never too late to make a change. It might be scary, and it might take a while to figure things out, but taking that first step towards something new can lead to amazing things. Don't wait for the perfect moment, because it might never come. Sometimes, you just have to take the leap and trust that things will work out. I accidentally started a $1 million business because I was too embarrassed to admit I had no idea how to fix a toilet. 2 years ago, I was working a soul-crushing IT support job in a cubicle farm. You know the type: bad lighting, microwaved fish smells, managers who use words like synergy unironically. I was making decent money, but I felt like I was dying a little every time I had to reset someone's Outlook password. Then one Friday evening, I came home to a plumbing disaster. My apartment bathroom was basically Niagara Falls. Toilet overflowing, water everywhere. I panicked. My landlord was notoriously useless, and plumbers in my area charge a fortune just to show up. I did what any sane millennial would do. I Googled it. But instead of a straightforward how-to video, I fell into a black hole of terrible tutorials. Most were either overly technical, filmed in 480p with bad lighting, or made by what I can only describe as toilet influencers who spent 80% of the video talking about their life stories. After an hour of struggling, I gave up and called a plumber, who charged me $200 to do something I swear took him 3 minutes. That night, while shamefully scrolling Reddit, I posted a throwaway comment complaining about the lack of simple, high-quality repair guides for clueless adults like me. That comment blew up. People were sharing their own basic DIY fails and begging for someone to make decent tutorials. The idea stuck with me. I spent the weekend making a list of 20 basic home repair tasks I had no clue how to do: unclogging sinks, fixing a broken light switch, patching drywall, etc. Then I had a weird idea. What if I made videos for people like me, someone with no skills, no tools, and very little patience? Now, here's the twist. I wasn't a handyman. Not even close. I had to learn each task from scratch by watching 5 or 6 other tutorials, distilling the info, and figuring out what actually worked. Then I'd script out a simple version and film myself doing it, with a focus on all the stuff that confused me during the learning process. I called the channel Fix It For Real, because that's what I wanted. Not theories, not hacky TikTok tips, just real fixes that actually worked. The first video I posted was how to fix a running toilet without crying. I filmed it on my phone, edited it in iMovie, and uploaded it with zero expectations. It got 87 views in the first week, then 200, then 2,000. Then suddenly it hit Reddit. Someone shared it in our /life pro tips. The title made people click, and the no-nonsense, non-condescending tone kept them watching. Comments poured in. This is the only video that made sense. I actually fixed my toilet. Thank you. Subscribed. Please do one on light switches next. So I did. Every weekend, I made a new video. I kept the same formula: simple tasks, clear instructions, and honest screw-ups. If I messed up during filming, I left it in and explained why. People loved that. They said it made them feel less stupid. By month 3, I had 20K subscribers. I started making some money from YouTube ads, nothing huge, but enough to get my attention. I upgraded my gear slightly, got better lighting, and started taking it more seriously. I even quit my IT job when I got a freelance gig making instructional videos for a hardware brand that had found me through the channel. Here's where things started to snowball. One day, I posted a video called How to Patch a Hole in Drywall Like a Real Adult. It exploded. Over 1.5 million views in a week. I was contacted by 3 different tool companies offering to sponsor my videos. At first, I thought it was a scam. One of them, a newer brand selling all-in-one toolkits, wanted to send me free products in exchange for a shout-out. I agreed. But instead of just promoting their kit, I reviewed it honestly. I explained what was good, what sucked, and what I'd improve. That video made more money from affiliate links than I had made in 3 months at my old job. So I took it further. I reached out to the toolkit company and pitched them an idea. Let me redesign this toolkit from scratch for people like me, apartment dwellers, first-time homeowners, young adults moving out. Most toolkits were either too cheap and useless or massive overkill. I wanted to make a practical, compact, high-quality starter toolkit. To my surprise, they agreed. I worked with their product team to design the Fix-It Starter Kit. We included everything I actually used in my videos: stud finder, compact drill, hex keys, a real plunger, not the dollar store kind. I made a launch video explaining exactly why each item was in the box. The kit launched as a limited run on their website. It sold out in 48 hours. We restocked. Sold out again. I started selling them directly on my own site. Within 6 months, we'd moved over 20,000 units. I partnered with a fulfillment service and turned my spare bedroom into a makeshift HQ. But the real turning point came when I launched Fix It School, a subscription-based platform with step-by-step courses. Each course focused on a skill: electrical, plumbing, basic carpentry, IKEA hacks, seasonal prep. I charge $10/month, no long-term commitment, cancel anytime. I figured I'd get a couple hundred sign-ups. I got 8,000 in the first month. Apparently, people were tired of feeling useless and wanted to actually learn how to take care of their homes. The fact that I wasn't an expert but had learned everything recently made me more relatable. I explained why I struggled, which shortcuts worked, and what not to do, things pros often forget to mention. Today, 2 years later, Fix It for Real is a full business. We have 5 employees: a video editor, a community manager, a part-time electrician and plumber for consultations, and my sister who handles fulfillment and logistics. The YouTube channel has over 1.2 million subscribers. The toolkit line has expanded to 3 versions, and the Fix It School now has over 30,000 active members. Last year, we cleared just over $1.3 million in revenue. And to think, it all started because I didn't know how to fix a toilet and was too embarrassed to ask someone. So if you're sitting on a weird idea, something born out of frustration or shame, or just trying to solve your own problem, don't dismiss it. That might be exactly where your business is hiding. I started my business after a hangover. Not the poetic kind either, just the greasy, dry-mouthed, deep-in-debt variety that makes you reevaluate every decision you've ever made. It was February 2021, still pandemic times, and I had just been let go from the 3rd job in a year. My resume looked like a quilt made by someone with commitment issues. I was 29, broke, living in a dingy apartment with black mold in the bathroom ceiling, and I had no savings. The night before, I'd gone out with my friend Derek, a guy I met in one of my short-lived warehouse jobs. He always bought drinks and didn't seem to mind when I forgot my wallet for the 5th time. At some point during the night, he said, "Man, you're too smart to be broke. You should sell something." I laughed it off then, but the next morning, after vomiting up the $2 tacos and the cheap bourbon we'd chased with Bud Light, I actually thought about it. What could I sell? The thing is, I was good with my hands. Not in the build-a-deck kind of way, but more in the make things that look nice on Etsy kind of way. I'd been making resin art as a hobby since college. Small trays, ashtrays, and coasters, mostly for friends. Some with glitter, some with pressed flowers, some with little skulls or anime stickers. It was therapeutic, in a way. My ex used to call it my silly little craft, but I never stopped doing it. That day, I made a decision. I was going to sell resin art on the internet. I didn't have a business plan or capital. I had $342 in my bank account and a closet full of half-used resin kits and silicone molds. I scavenged for anything I could upcycle. I posted on Facebook Marketplace offering customized trays. I listed a few pieces on Etsy. My first sale came 2 weeks later, a glittery blue ashtray I'd made on a whim. I sold it for $18, and after shipping, packaging, and fees, I made about $4. But it might as well have been $4,000. I started reinvesting every cent: resin, pigments, glitter, alcohol ink, silicone molds. I worked at night, slept during the day, and survived off discount ramen and eggs. I watched YouTube videos on SEO and Etsy analytics like they were life support. I learned how to photograph my pieces better using natural light and a $12 ring light off eBay. By April, I had 78 sales. In May, it jumped to 213. I was still living off ramen, but I upgraded to the spicy kind. I started recording TikToks of the pouring process, and one of them, a video of me embedding fake eyeballs into a black resin coaster, went viral. It got over 600,000 views, and my shop exploded. I hit $10,000 in revenue in June. I say revenue, not profit, because I spent half of it buying better materials and finally paying off my cell phone debt. I didn't take a paycheck until August. That same month, a local boutique DM'd me on Instagram. They wanted to carry my stuff, weird but classy resin pieces, as they described them. I nearly cried. I went to their store with a plastic tub full of trays and ashtrays, dressed like I was interviewing for a bank job. They took everything on consignment. I remember the first weekend they sold out. I got a text from the owner that just said, "Bring more." That was the first time I felt like a business owner, not just a hustler. I opened a business bank account. I filed for an LLC. I even hired a bookkeeper because numbers make my brain short-circuit. The funny part is, I never thought it would grow past my apartment kitchen. But it did. By the end of 2021, I had over 2,000 Etsy sales, was carried in 3 local shops, and had grossed $78,000. I upgraded to a bigger apartment with a second bedroom that became my studio. I didn't hire anyone, couldn't afford it yet, but I was finally paying myself enough to live like a person again. In early 2022, I got an email that changed everything. A buyer from an indie home goods chain found me on TikTok. They wanted to place a wholesale order, not consignment. A paid, upfront order of 1,500 units, mostly coasters and trinket trays. I'd never produced anything in bulk. I nearly said no, but I didn't. I took every dollar I had and turned my studio into a production line. I enlisted 2 friends who were between jobs and paid them under the table to help me mix, pour, sand, polish, and package. We worked 12-hour days for 3 straight weeks. My hands were constantly sticky, my apartment smelled like chemicals, and I was permanently glittery. But we hit the deadline. When the payment hit my bank account, $42,000, I sat on the floor and cried. Ugly cried. That spring, I finally did something smart. I raised my prices. I'd been undercharging out of fear. Once I raised my prices by 25%, my sales actually increased. People saw the products as more premium. I also started doing small batch drops on my website, which sold out in minutes. I had collectors messaging me asking when the next skull collection would launch. It wasn't all glitter and rainbows. I messed up orders, got hit with Etsy fees I didn't understand, had supply shortages that delayed deliveries, and once melted a whole batch of coasters by using the wrong hardener ratio. There was a week when I didn't sleep because a customer accused me of copying her design. We'd both used floating flowers and gold flakes, which is like accusing someone of copying peanut butter and jelly. But I learned. I documented everything. I tracked costs to the cent. I eventually got a proper small batch manufacturer to help with molds. I created a system to scale without burning out. Now it's 2025. I have a team of 4, 2 full-time, 2 part-time. We work out of a small studio in town that smells like a mix of lavender and epoxy. My company, which I named Ghost Glaze, crossed $400,000 in revenue last year. We're in 23 stores across the U.S. I finally launched a candle line too, because apparently people like things that smell like graveyard dirt and moonlit fog. Who knew? Sometimes I still wake up waiting for it all to collapse. I'm not a born CEO. I still write social captions myself, still pack the first order from every new drop by hand. But I'm no longer broke, no longer scared, and no longer thinking of my craft as silly. I built something. From nothing. Out of fumes and grit and late-night TikToks. And it all started with a hangover. I didn't mean to start a business. I just wanted my weekends back. I was 26, working as an IT support specialist at a mid-sized insurance company in Denver. Think, resetting passwords for boomers and unjamming printers level of glamour. I hated every Monday, tolerated Tuesday through Thursday, and lived for Friday. The worst part wasn't even the job, it was the helpless feeling of running in place. My boss was a guy who peaked in 2002, and the company's idea of innovation was switching from fax to email. But what pushed me over the edge wasn't a bad day at work, it was my neighbor, Mark. Mark was this laid-back dude who always seemed to be home. I'd see him taking his dog out at noon, midweek, sipping iced coffee, looking relaxed while I was rushing to make it to a Zoom meeting. One day, I finally asked him, "What do you do?" He smiled and said, "I sell reclaimed wood shelves on Etsy." That sounded like the biggest BS I'd ever heard. But when I pressed, he showed me his setup, nothing fancy, just a small garage shop, some tools, a Shopify site, and his Etsy store. He was clearing $8K a month. My brain short-circuited. That night I went down a rabbit hole. Reclaimed wood, woodworking tools, Etsy trends, shipping logistics, even IRS classifications. The next weekend, I drove to a local salvage yard and bought 3 planks of old barnwood. Cost me $45. I didn't even know what I was going to make, but it felt like the beginning of something. I spent the next few weekends learning the basics: sanding, staining, cutting, sealing. YouTube became my mentor. My first product was a floating shelf with brackets I bought off Amazon. I posted it on Etsy for $65, took the cleanest photos I could with my phone, and forgot about it. 3 days later, it sold. Now, $65 minus fees and materials didn't leave me rich. But that ding from the Etsy app hit harder than any paycheck I'd ever gotten. Someone out there, some stranger, had chosen my shelf. That night, I stayed up sketching new designs. My girlfriend thought I was losing it. The next few months were a blur. I started spending my weekends building shelves, coat racks, even small side tables. I reinvested everything. Bought better tools, cleaned out my garage, made a tiny photo booth with LED strips and white poster boards. Orders were slow but steady. 3 a week, then 5. I started adding personalization, names, dates carved into the wood. That took off. At 6 months in, I was making around $2K/month after expenses. Not enough to quit, but enough to matter. Then 2 things happened that changed everything. First, one of my personalized pieces, a coat rack with engraved names for a big family, got featured in an Etsy newsletter. I don't know how. I never figured that out. But overnight, my orders jumped to 40. I had to start turning people away. My weekends disappeared again, but now it was sawdust and coffee, not Outlook and meetings. Second, my girlfriend left me. She was supportive at first, but I'd become obsessed. I forgot birthdays, skipped date nights, even flaked on her brother's wedding. We had a huge fight after I canceled a weekend getaway because I needed to ship out 5 shelves. She told me she felt like a widow to a man who was still alive. That broke me a little. I took a week off, refunded every open order, and questioned everything. Was I building a business or just another job I hated? After some soul-searching, I decided to do it differently. I spent the next month streamlining. I narrowed my offerings to just 3 bestsellers. I outsourced the engraving to a local laser shop and hired a college kid part-time to help with sanding and packing. I increased my prices. I added a waitlist. And I launched a real website, no more relying just on Etsy. By year 2, I was making over $10K a month consistently. I quit my IT job. Told my boss I was going to go into wood. He thought I was high. The transition to full-time entrepreneur wasn't smooth. There were months I barely broke even. One summer, a heat wave warped half my inventory and I had to eat $3,000 in losses. Another time, a batch of shelves got stolen off my porch before pickup, and I had to remake everything overnight. But it was mine. The mistakes, the wins, the risks, all mine. One of the best moments came during a random Tuesday morning. I was having coffee at a cafe when I saw a couple browsing my site on an iPad. I leaned over and said, "I make those." They didn't believe me until I showed them my driver's license. We laughed and took a selfie. Today, 3.5 years since that first shelf, I run a small workshop with 3 employees. We ship around 300 pieces a month. I recently launched a line of modular desk organizers for remote workers. It's doing okay, still early. I also mentor a few local makers trying to get started. The money's good, but what I value most is the autonomy. I take Tuesdays off to hike. I make breakfast at home. I go to every family event. And I haven't had to explain a printer jam in years. Mark, my neighbor, still lives next door. We joke about starting a reclaimed furniture empire. He's doing kitchens now, got into cabinetry. I owe him more than I can say. Sometimes people ask me for advice on how to get started. I tell them what I wish someone had told me. Start small. Solve one problem. Make one thing. Sell it. Learn. Repeat. And don't be afraid to lose your weekends for a while. If you do it right, you'll get them back. I'm not sure if this is a success story or just a long string of bad decisions that finally tripped over a good one. But here's how I accidentally ended up owning a company that now makes over $500K in annual revenue after 3 years of chaos, depression, and dumb luck. Back in 2019, I was 26, working at a medium-sized marketing agency in Denver. My title was content strategist, which is corporate speak for do everything creative but without any actual authority. I was underpaid, overworked, and still clinging to the idea that I needed to pay my dues. My boss, who I swear was running the company like it was still 2005, kept shooting down every new idea I had. Social media campaigns? Too fluffy. Email automations? We don't need robots doing our work. Podcasts? No one listens to those. I started resenting my job and quietly building a list of ideas I would try if I ever went solo. The final straw came when I landed a $50K client through a connection I brought in, and they gave the account to someone else because you're not at a senior level yet. I rage quit 2 days later. I didn't have a plan. I had $8,900 in savings, a 2010 Honda Civic, and a rented apartment that was about to become very unaffordable. But I did have an idea. See, one of the things I pitched at the agency was a service package specifically for small local businesses who couldn't afford big marketing retainers but still needed help. Think plumbers, dog groomers, cafes, yoga studios, people who needed SEO, email campaigns, and a half-decent website but were stuck hiring their nephew who took a Digital Media 101 course on Coursera. So I took that idea and built it into a scrappy little consultancy. I called it Torchlight Digital. Why? Because it sounded cool and I was too lazy to do a full brand workshop on myself. My first client was my roommate's cousin, who ran a meal prep service. I charged her $300 to redo her website, clean up her Instagram bio, and set up an automated welcome email. She paid me in 2 installments, cash, and a week's worth of chicken and quinoa meals. But that little win gave me the confidence to start cold emailing and DMing local businesses. It took about 4 months to land my next 5 clients, each paying somewhere between $200, $700 month. I was just barely scraping by. I did everything manually, built sites on Squarespace, designed social media posts in Canva, wrote blogs myself, scheduled everything via Buffer. I had 0 processes. I worked from 7 a.m. to midnight almost every day. I developed a permanent shoulder knot and an eye twitch. And yet, weirdly, I loved it. Then came the pandemic. In March 2020, half my clients paused or ghosted. I lost about 70% of my revenue in 1 week. My own anxiety skyrocketed. I was back to eating ramen and panicking. I almost gave up, but 2 things saved me. First, I got a desperate call from a local bakery that was trying to switch to online orders but had no clue how. I threw together an online ordering page using Shopify and Zapier, helped them push it on social, and within 2 weeks, they were doing more revenue online than they did in-store. They referred me to 3 other local shops. I started realizing there was an urgent need here, and I leaned in hard. Second, I started automating. I taught myself Integromat, NowMake, got better at email sequences, created reusable templates for everything, and finally invested in a decent proposal software. My time per client dropped by 40%. I increased my pricing to $1,000/month minimum. Most importantly, I stopped doing everything custom. I created a package system, something I could deliver at scale. By the end of 2020, I had about 18 clients on retainers, a few one-off web design projects, and enough income to hire my first contractor, a virtual assistant from the Philippines named Joanna, who ended up being the smartest hire I've ever made. She was a force of nature. She organized our files, created SOPs, managed client scheduling, and even started helping with some content. With her support, I was able to step back and think bigger. That's when I had what I call my accidental product idea. One of our core offerings was a welcome series, automated emails that helped small businesses onboard new leads. Joanna had helped me turn this into a really slick, editable system that made it super easy to customize for each client. I realized, what if we sold just that? So we beta tested a product called HelloBox. It was a DIY onboarding kit for small business owners, plug-and-play email templates, a Zapier setup guide, some video walkthroughs, and Canva-designed assets. We priced it at $97. I posted about it in 2 Facebook groups and sold 43 copies in the first week. It wasn't life-changing money, but it showed me that productizing could work. Over the next year, I phased out a lot of my 1:1 services and leaned into productized services and digital tools. We launched 3 new boxes, one for local SEO, one for event promotion, and one for online booking funnels. I brought on a part-time copywriter and a junior developer. By 2022, Torchlight was making around $320K annually, with around 40% profit margins. Then came the wild part. In late 2022, I got an email from a guy named Carlos who ran a chain of boutique gyms in the Southwest. He asked if I could license our HelloBox for all 12 of his locations. I had no idea what licensing even looked like, but I said yes and spent 2 weeks Googling how to structure it. We ended up closing a $24,000 deal for a 12-month license. I danced around my apartment like a lunatic. That deal led to more referrals. I started offering bulk licenses of our digital kits for franchisees and regional businesses. We created a membership platform for recurring access and updates, priced at $1,200/year. By mid-2023, we had over 100 active business clients on licenses and another 200 plus using one-time digital kits. Today, Torchlight has 8 people on the team, 3 full-time, 5 part-time/contract, and we just crossed $520K in revenue. I still work a lot, but nowhere near those brutal 18-hour startup days. I actually take weekends off now. I sleep. I don't check Slack after 6. Joanna now runs most of the operations like a pro. So yeah, I didn't invent anything. I didn't build an app or get VC funding. I didn't go viral. But I solved a real problem for real businesses, and I scaled slowly, sustainably, and mostly out of desperation. There were moments I was one rent payment away from giving up, but I'm glad I didn't. I still remember that first $300 check like it was $1 million. And I'd take this messy, hard-won independence over any agency job any day. If you're reading this and stuck in a job you hate, just know this. Sometimes all it takes is one small idea, one person who trusts you, and a lot of uncomfortable growth. The rest? You figure it out as you go. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.